I think if we look at the specific RuneQuest example you made, I'm sure that if I reach for my library and pick up some games, I'm going to find a lot of rules for survival skills or
Right.
foraging that tell you if you succeed, you procure food for 5 people for 2 days,
Right.
and then nowhere in the book you're going to find what happens if you don't have food.
Yes, but in this particular case, we were using the original RuneQuest rules with a slight set of tweaks by me in
Mhm.
terms of what the skills were.
Yeah,
But
no,
that
but
get
what
but
I
that particular, and I completely agree. The toolbox is there,
there
but
is a culture in writing these games that very, very often didn't take care of
right,
saying, if you fail, this happens. It's
exactly.
almost as if the DM is supposed to wing it somehow when failure happens, and
Right.
there is, and I think this is also very prevalent in those games that let everybody roll for everything,
Right. This
because
is
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
the presumption is that everybody's going to roll. You were making the example before of games that where the guy with 25% succeed. We had a lot of that playing
Right.
D&D 5th edition, because the skills are very narrow. So we would have the barbarian trying to blow down the door, and then the wizard succeeding.
Right.
Eh,
Well, the idea is
eh,
everyone gets to try, everybody can at least try everything. And in a way, it's kind of guaranteeing that somebody's going to do it,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Somebody's going to do it. And so that way we don't have to worry about failure in terms of outcomes, true outcomes,
Yeah,
right? Whether the
exactly.
door goes down or not. We don't have to worry about it because somebody's going to get it. You get that a lot with investigation rolls too.
Yeah,
Everybody rolls investigation and
exactly.
everybody keeps rolling investigation. When they all fail, then they just roll again in the next place they check. And
And
somebody's going to get it sooner or later.
I don't
And
want to
so,
open another. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
sorry.
No, the
No, I
idea
don't.
being here, go ahead. Yeah.
No, no. You do it. Sorry, I
Okay.
have a bit of lag. Sorry.
I see. Well, only very briefly then. We touched on this a little bit at the beginning, just before you came in, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we were thinking about false failure. There's plain old fudging the roll, just pretending that
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
success anyway. And then there's this somewhat subtler false failure when you just like move the statue to another room and see if they make it then. You're just going to keep putting the statue in front of them until somebody freaking notices it, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Or things like you say, well, you failed in discovering that, but then you just have like the chauffeur tell you a little later,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Stuff like that. So there's lots of ways to do it where you can kind of pretend you didn't. But anyway, that's what I was going to say. But go on. So
No,
let's
I just
avoid the false failure problem. That's all. So go on.
I I I don't want to open a new can of worms, but if you want to look at a new, let's call it a brand of games that, in my opinion, go a very long way to dismantle the entire concept of failure, there's the Forged in the Dark games, which are games where you get you get many tools to narrate how, despite what would be failure, you still get to where you're supposed to go. In the mechanics, you have kind of 2 3 different fail safe systems, so that you don't really have to deal with the idea that something actually goes wrong. You get a lot of complications, but you never get a no. And having playing that quite a lot recently, uh, at some point we realized that it becomes a tool to narrating how rather than narrating
Right. You're
what.
basically saying, how did we get there?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. You mean, if it's not a resist roll, then it's
The
invoking a flashback, then it's invoking something else. But anyways, the chance of failure is already very low, because you're not going to get a lot of failed rolls. And then the rolls you can resist. And then when you get stuck, you can invoke the flashback.
you may not realize just how stinky this can of worms that you've opened is.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I
Which
shouldn't
no,
have.
but
I
no, you go right ahead. But I will point out that one of my criticisms of Harper's games as a general thing is that it's story above all else. You
Yeah,
will actually
exactly.
the story will flow and you will get one no matter what happens. You
Yeah,
will
yeah.
all get there. The story will develop. It will
I-
turn
I-
out,
I-
but not in a circle of hands way.
no, it's not. It's
It's
never
much
going
more in a
to.
safer way, in my opinion. But
You get this feeling. We really saw this, that the first time get up from the table and say, nice, this worked well because we narrated exactly the story we wanted to tell, and then you do it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and you realize you always get what you wanted.
mhm.
And if you compare that well with what we were doing when we were kids with games that didn't really care for this, but you will be more surprised more often. The general chaos of everything is going to, and failure plays a lot. And I remember days where we were stuck for an entire afternoon on one simple problem, playing basic or playing, that would happen a lot.
So,
And
Alexandra, can I hold on, Lorenzo? Let me
yeah,
hop to
sorry.
Alexandra. Yeah.
Um, I talked before about D&D, where the failure in the fight meant that it's a chance for an opponent to hit you. And probably we won't have an option to run away because I failed my open the lock check,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe I wouldn't have a chance to do it next time. Or like taking hits means that some supplies, we've got the hit points are supplies, resources. Sorry,
Right.
resources are depleted. And in this game, like in Blades in the Dark, and even more in Band of Blades, uh, those what you say, the resisting roll, the flashback roll, and so on, are giving us what we want right now for a cost of depleting our resources. So, and depleting our resources uh, also gives us a different kind of failure. So it's kind of similar to Bliss stage or Siren, where when we designate which dice go where. So I can basically
Right. You
make it.
decide what you get hit for.
Yes,
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
I can decide in Blazing Dark. Do I want to fail this roll now and take the consequences, or maybe I want to resist a roll and have a less chance to resist the consequences later, and maybe if I take enough harm, I will risk to have a trauma, and 4 traumas makes my character how would say like
You get a
unavailable
scar or
to
something, right? Isn't that it?
yeah no, after four traumas, the character is inaccessible to play,
Right.
like
Right.
he dies or like
Right. Right.
it's
Exactly. Yeah.
something. The same is with heat. I can take some heat now, and let's say I will kill this blue coat because he's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
but it will produce heat and some complications. And if I've got enough heat, it will make the wanted level go higher. It will mean more complications for our group. And if we generate enough enough heat, some of our characters will be removed from play
Right.
for a while or for longer. So uh, in the long run, it will produce some kind of story, probably different. It will it's less it's me deciding whether I want when I want the complications, but the complication will arise in due time.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here, go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
I just wondered, does Blades in the Dark have a way of mitigating? I can't remember what the rules say, whether you can reduce your heat by taking certain actions or reduce the stress that leads to trauma by taking certain actions.
Yes, but still, you've got two actions or three in downtime. So if I delegate one action to reduce heat, then I won't have an action to
Yeah.
get an asset that I would need.
You can indulge your vice and stuff like that. So if you,
It reminds me, what you're describing reminds me of my experience of playing Fate, in that players get to ameliorate or get to succeed provided they're willing to reduce the resource. The difference would be that in Fate, it's much easier to renew your resource, it sounds like. Yeah.
And I think Alexandra pointed out something that is interesting for me, which is that in Blades in the Dark, a lot more stuff happens between heists than during the heists. I think the main problem I have is within the heist itself, the classic play. But what happens in between is actually it can be very explosive in terms of moving on the story in a way that we don't expect.
Right.
And yeah.
Okay, so there's in a way, I would kind of like to play Blades in the Dark with a lot of interesting failures that cause the shape of the next adventure to be very different because of our limited choices in between the sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have to go in 8 minutes, but I want to mention one game I found out lately, and it's got some interesting thing about failures. And you probably know it's saves. So the idea is that we don't test when we want to achieve something. We test when we want to not fail. So
yes. Mm-hmm.
So
which
let's
game is this that you're referencing?
I know Mouse Ritter. It's something. It looks like Mouse Guard, Torchbearer, and Into the Odd mixed together. It looks super fun. And Hexcrawl, and I know it's not in my alley, but anyway. So if I want to do something and GM says, okay, you just do it, but sometimes it's risky. So I can say, okay, just do it, and
Right.
I know the rocks fall. And if you want to, and if you don't care, just rocks fall, you get the damage. But if you don't want to be under the rocks and take damage, then
try
you
to
say,
dodge.
okay,
Right.
I resist it. Right?
But this is actually a very useful thing because we're used to this in terms of inanimate objects and things like that, where it is a given that the poison will kill you. It is a given that the rocks will hurt you. And the only question is whether you manage to avoid it or defend against it. But this, if we take that a little more extreme, and I know I've talked about this a couple of times in other sessions of some sort or another, where I talked a lot about an idea that I always credit to the person who came up with it, whose name was Amanda Flowers. She wanted to have a martial arts fighting oriented role-playing game with lots and lots of options and lots of styles and lots of things like that. But what interested her was to assume that everybody fighting was an expert and could not miss.
Mm-hmm.
And so all you ever rolled was defensive moves. It was a given that you and anyone else was going to hit. And so the only thing that the dice were involved with was the success of the defense.
Mm-hmm. But if we as a hobby manage to have the tests against the opposition without the opposition rolling, what's the problem with having saves without the opposition rolling, right?
No, that's exactly it. We're okay with it with saves, aren't we?
Yeah.
right? We're not rolling for whether the poison works in its own
Yeah.
competence. We're
It
only
also,
rolling with whether we resist it or however we choose to narrate it. But that's what I was talking about. It seemed to me that that was making a lot of sense, especially for her concept. And I always was sad that people didn't give her a lot more support in working on that system, and which is why I often like to reference that. I feel as though it got shorted in the discussion at the time.